I am just in awe looking out at you all here today. I think it's absolutely amazing. You're here to support each other. You have individual stories that my half an hour is never going to do justice to. And Annabelle's presentation, clearly it's a very hard act to follow. Some excellent points there, and some points that I actually am planning to cover too, so thank you for that. The one thing I'd also say to John is we don't choose our family, we're born into it, and sometimes they're going to be helpful people and sometimes they're not, and we need to pick the people who are additive in our lives. So we make choices about the people that we associate with, and some people unfortunately don't make it on the list for whatever reason. They just drain us. We've all had the experience of going out to lunch with someone and coming back and feeling like you needed to have a lie down on the bed, because it's like they stuck a needle in your arm and zapped every bit of energy from you. Yeah? They are not additive people, they are subtractive people, and we limit our contact with those people. But the additive people, I know each of you, as you're sitting there, are thinking about an additive person in your life, a person that is an asset. They are your phone a friend people. And all of us probably need to think about having 5, as Eddie McGuire used to say, phone a friend people, that they're the people that we can call on. 2 in the morning, give them a call, feeling terrible, not knowing what to do. And we need to perhaps even document who they are. And sometimes we need to have a conversation with them to seek permission as well. But John, your situation is not an unusual one. I do see it all the time. So, you know, just choose. And that's the best advice we can ever give. My presentation today, I'm really going to go through the first half fairly quickly, because what I really want to focus on is giving you some strategies. And Annabelle's presentation was so practical, I think that's the best way to go. So, my brief was to get the thing working, that's the first thing. I wanted to talk about why is it difficult, why is it hard at times to cope with having a brain tumour, and to be someone who cares for someone who has a brain tumour. I also wanted to talk about what coping is actually and really what it's all about, and then how we do some of the practical stuff about managing our thoughts, how we go through problem solving, and what are the practical psychological supports that we can use. I've been working in psycho-oncology for probably 15 years or so now. I've worked here at the Cancer Council, and I still learn more from you guys than I do from any study, any textbook, any lecture that I ever went to. So much of this comes from my experience with people. We have to recognise that we deal with a traumatic experience in our own way, in our own time, but it is unique to you and it comes from so much of what's happened before. So your past experience, your personality style, and your supports. And it will vary, but it's always a process of adaptation, adjustment, and that wonderful word, acceptance. But it's very much a roller coaster. Would everyone agree? Yeah. I think this is a tame one. I've got a feeling it's a little bit more like this. But it's your roller coaster and it's unique to you. So many of my patients say to me, well, I've got on and I can't get off. And I'd really like to. I go back to some old research. Kubler-Ross was a theorist in the 70s who came up with a model for change in grief. She's the one who came up with these 5 stages of grief. We know there's more now, and we used to think it was a lovely straight line process, something that you went through. We now know it's a bit more topsy-turvy, and I'd hazard a guess that it's probably a little bit more like going over hurdles. But hurdles are hard. Sometimes we get stuck at the start. And sometimes it might just be the middle bit that's tough. But what's important, and this is why looking out at you all today is so humbling, is that you don't do it on your own. And I think that's something that Annabelle really brought home, is that You do it with the help of other people, your connections. And it is okay to let someone lift you up over that hurdle. Because then it's easier. I don't know why I chose rabbits for that. I really don't. What we don't want is this, because this is denial. Denial is a useful coping resource for a short period of time. But there's a point of time where we actually have to look at what's happening. As Annabelle said, we have to face the really tough stuff in our life. We have to face our own mortality. And for anyone here in the audience who's had a brain tumour, you've had to look at this really closely. And it's hard. And we can't ever take that away. But what we can do is give you some strategies that might be helpful. And this one, short term yes, long term no. You walk a bridge not knowing where your next step might fall, whether that plank will hold your weight or not, and it is living with uncertainty. And whatever metaphor I use, it is tough, and I say that to my patients every day. It is a tough thing to have to do, but you need to find a way to do it. Because we can't live in fear. Fear is our initial response. All of you remember that day that you were diagnosed. And they said to you, probably with an MRI scan on the screen, pointing things out that you thought, that just looks like a piece of fluff, I don't know what that means. And saying things like tumour, cancer, and perhaps even putting numbers and figures around things. And you would have felt like that little dog in full flight and flight response with a cataclysmic explosion of chemicals going through your body. And we've all been that little dog. It is the brain perceiving a threat, alerting the body, and reacting with a whole host of physical and emotional symptoms. And it triggers an anxiety response. And anxiety, physiological arousal, is helpful because it gets us out of trouble. But when we can't turn it off, because when does the threat of brain tumour actually go away, we stay up here with this elevated level of arousal, and it doesn't take much to push you into this danger zone where you might become explosive, where you might find it difficult to cope containing your emotions. Anyone been in Bunnings or in the bread shop and someone said to you, "How are you today?" and you burst into tears? Or you felt the emotions welling up because someone's been kind to me? Because again, we're right on the edge here. We have to recognise though, and this is the best slide I think I actually have and own, and it says normal is just a cycle on the washing machine. So again, reiterating that you do all of this in your own way, and some people will find small things that are overwhelming, and other people will find larger things harder to cope with. It's a completely individual thing. But what we do know is that there's a whole range of issues, physical, social, spiritual, existential, issues to do with our healthcare system, and emotional and psychological issues that impact. And I'm going through this quickly because I do want to talk about all the practical stuff. We know there's a lot of physical stuff, scarring, disfigurement, pain, sleep issues. We know there's issues with fatigue, issues with cognitive function, with seizures, with, as Annabelle pointed out, with some other things, so peripheral neuropathy and urgency, and all of these things play a huge role on your emotional coping. If you have pain, it's very hard to be happy because it overwhelms you. So your physical symptoms are the things that I'm going to encourage you to keep bringing up, keep trying to come up with strategies, keep talking about it with your healthcare team, whoever they might involve, because often there is more that we can do, but things fall off the radar. You go into a medical consultation and you have 5 things on your list to talk about. The first and the last are probably the things that actually get addressed. It's called the primacy and recency effect. And that's probably what happens, and the stuff in the middle falls off the radar. And you go to the next consultation and you bring up 5 things, and again the same thing happens. And it's a bit of a shame if it's the same 3 things that are in the middle all the time, isn't it? Because they're the ones that are just falling off. So keep telling us about them. If you've got a particular issue that's difficult, go to the consultation with that issue in hand and say, I've come to you a couple of times and spoken about this, but this issue is really difficult for me and I'd like to spend 10 minutes or so just focusing on this one thing. Now, very difficult to ignore that now, isn't it? Because you've made it the focus of attention. There are huge social issues for all of you. Changes in roles, different dependencies. There is no free lunch. There is always a financial cost. Changes in occupation and social isolation, and Annabelle mentioned this. This picture comes from a gallery in New York. It's called Christina's World. I had the wonderful privilege of going and spending some time over at a hospital called Sloan Kettering, which is one of the key psycho-oncology centres, a couple of years back. And at one of the galleries I spent some time and found this picture completely captivating. We can be very close to home but still feel completely isolated. Many of your family and friends don't get it because they haven't been there. How could they? They're bewildered, sometimes rowing in different directions, and they don't necessarily understand the enormity of the experience and how it affects every aspect of you, including how you see the world, your spirituality, your existential view of what makes sense for you. Living with uncertainty, searching for meaning, asking the fundamental question of why did this happen to me? What did I do? And coming back with an answer that perhaps is, well, why not me? What would make me different from anyone else who might have a traumatic experience in their life? Trying to understand it, sometimes with what we call the just world hypothesis. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Nothing like a diagnosis of cancer to blow that out of the water. But recognising too that sometimes you learn things about yourself and other people. Sometimes there is that concept of post-traumatic growth. It may not always be completely a negative experience. Our healthcare system is impersonal. You are forced to make complex treatment decisions without often enough information. Just a quick show of hands, how many people felt they had enough information to make decisions about their treatment when they had to make them? 3, 4 hands go up. And I know we probably do things better now, but it always makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end when I ask that question, because it means that we've got a lot of learning to do still. We subject you to trauma. You are done too. Often with a lack of information, we use medical jargon, tell us, correct us, and lack of intimacy. Those wonderful coats, those wonderful gowns that they make you wear, these are dignity conserving gowns from the States. They have a dignity flap at the back. If you're admitted to the hospital, please ask for 2 gowns if they don't have these, so that you don't have to be your bottom to anyone. If you feel comfortable, ask to be called your first name. It personalises, it makes you, you. Don't lose your sense of personhood just because you're admitted to hospital. And if you have a choice, get dressed in your civvy clothes every day. It will make a difference to how you feel. And encourage people to talk to you at your level. Encourage them to sit down and talk to you. Even your consultant. See what they say. This is what I'm here to talk about. The body image issues and self-esteem. The body is changed. There are often changes in what you can do. And the idea that I'm not me anymore and I don't perhaps want to look in the mirror. But we all need to be the lion. What matters is how you see yourself. We often don't talk about this, do we? The sexual concerns. I had a patient the other day who actually brought it up with me before I had chance to talk about it. He actually said, why is it hard? Why am I finding this difficult? Why is there a problem? And I said, because you've been through a traumatic experience. That's why. And it's difficult. But what we don't want is this. Maybe some of you might. Because it leads to this, and it leads to that separation. What we have to be doing is talking. Relationship concerns are always an issue because there are changes in role, there are reaction of others, and some people feel lost because they're not involved. So your carer, your support person needs to also be a confidant, someone that you talk to. Because they want you to leave the experience behind, not realising that it's part of who you are. You can't just leave that bit of your identity and go off and leave it behind. It doesn't work like that. It comes with you whether you want it to or not. New relationships can be particularly challenging. The story I tell here, after all of my years of experience in oncology, doesn't come from oncology. It comes from my work in organ transplantation many years ago when I was doing my postgraduate research. And as a quid pro quo, I used to do some counselling and collect data for free. And I was working with a girl who'd had a lung transplant. And she started a new relationship, and she had to tell this guy that she'd had a transplant because they were going to become intimate, there were big scars and issues with life expectancy. And she said, I'm going to do this, and we had a role play, and she came back the next week and she said, well, I told him, and you're not going to believe what happened. And for note, if you ever say that to a therapist, it is the most wonderful thing you could ever say because it gets our attention and we lean in and we do all that wonderful empathy stuff. And I said, really, what happened? And she said, well, I told him everything, and I said about, it was a palliative procedure and all of this stuff. And he said, oh, that's interesting. I've had my appendix out. Do you want to see the scar? Dare I say that he was the right person for her, and they got married. And it was wonderful because he just got it. You may have to kiss a few frogs. You may have to tell a few people your story and they don't get it. And that's sad. But the person who does will be there to support you. And that's the important thing. Because we have to recognise too that relationships that do have problems may not survive this experience. If your relationship is in trouble, please get some help. Relationships Australia is a fantastic place to start. Your GP can also point you in a direction of a great relationship counsellor. Because we don't want this. And it all is about communication though. Because men and women are apples and pears. We do speak differently and we don't always hear what the other person said, and especially if they don't tell us. I didn't set a psychic examination when I went into my relationship. I do not know most of the time what he is thinking or what he's on about unless he actually tells me, and it goes both ways. Normality is one of the losses. But there are other losses. Certainty of future, loss of the body integrity and the idea of me as a well person. And there's grief and sadness about those. Anger and resentment, and it can look like this or it can be internalised. Uncertainty, as I keep talking about, because it is actually one of the biggest issues for all cancer patients, is the fear of uncertainty, the fear of recurrence. And the loss of control, feeling like you're on that roller coaster, feeling helpless or hopeless, a sense of loneliness and isolation, anxiety and depression. Not everyone becomes anxious and depressed, but some people do. And there's a lot you can do about it. Don't leave it. If you think you have a problem, please talk to someone. So how do we cope? We have to ask, is what I'm doing helpful? If yes, keep doing it. Pretty obvious. And if it's not helpful, then change. Think about doing something differently. Each of you have a toolbox of coping resources. Use them. If one isn't working, pick another one. There are multiple things that you have in your resource cupboard. Your attitude determines how you cope. If we are open to change, we're going to find it a lot easier than if we're resistant to change. Because change is all around us. Everything's changing all the time. And the most important thing I can ever say to you is just show up and go with whatever happens. see what happens. We're trying to shift things into opportunities just to see. So what helps? This is the most powerful thing you have at your disposal, your thought processes. And the hard thing for some of you is sometimes they're not as clear as they were before. But being able to challenge them, being able to work with them can be helpful. Thinking about that the stories that we tell ourselves are not helpful because they're stories. I can tell you a story about Claire. I hope no one here is called Claire. Phoebe, perhaps. Claire is on the way to the hospital. That is a fact. It is ambiguous. Second fact, Claire is concerned about the surgery today. Third fact, Claire's main concern is the theatre is only booked for 2 hours. Fourth fact, Claire realises none of this is her concern as the surgeon's receptionist. I told this at a big function up in Tamworth, and an oncologist came up to me afterwards and said, I think the surgeon should be a female. And I hadn't mentioned the gender of the surgeon. He'd filled in the blanks. Just as many of you did when you thought that Claire was a patient, didn't you? And maybe when I was talking about time in the theatre, a doctor. But you filled in the blanks, and we have to be careful when we're facing ambiguity that we don't fill in the blanks. That when someone says to us, this is a serious situation, that we don't think that somehow the word serious suddenly means fatal or terminal or that I'm dying. As far as I know, serious means serious. That there's the potential for a significant negative outcome. And that word potential is a really important one. We have to challenge some of our negative thought processes and avoid this catastrophizing, awfulizing concept of going to the worst case scenario, going over and over things, and worry never solved anything. We have to recognise that fear plays a huge role here, all controlled by a little part of your brain called the amygdala, part of the limbic system. And we've got to work with it. Because our stories are very powerful. And they are just stories. And until something happens, it is not a fact. I could have a thought up here that I'm a banana. Nothing magical has happened as yet, and I have not suddenly changed into one. So thoughts are not that powerful. We've got to work with them. There are these things that we call, as psychologists, automatic negative thoughts. They are, in fact, ants. Now, if you have an ant in your kitchen, what do? Do you say, hello, come, bring your friends, let's have a party on my bench, I'm going to get all of you to bring more friends? Of course you don't. You go or flick, or if you're environmentally kind, you pick it up and you take it outside. We get rid of them, we remove them, we challenge them, we don't encourage more to come. So these automatic negative thoughts, I wonder what my funeral will be like. I wonder who will come, who will make a speech. And maybe there won't be many people there. Are these thoughts helpful in any shape or form? No. Annabelle spoke about making practical plans, talking about the hard stuff, and she's right, you only really talk about it once. But those other negative thoughts are not helpful, and we've got to find ways of getting rid of them. So we challenge them. What is the evidence to support it now, in this moment? Are there errors in the way I'm thinking? Is there a different way of thinking? What's the best and worst thing that can happen? What is going to happen if I keep thinking like this? And this is the best one. What can I do? And if I can do something, we follow the Nike principle to life, and we just do it. We have to decatastrophize, move away from focusing on one outcome, universally negative. Other possibilities. Awareness to the here and now, mindfulness. Anyone here a meditator? It is mindfulness in May. So we need to bring mindfulness into our lives. Try it for the month of May. Cancer Council have a fantastic mindfulness CD that I would encourage all of you to ask for. Do you have any up the back? Yes, they do. So there we go. I've sold them out today. The focus is on living well. and avoiding being anxiety girl, able to jump to the worst conclusion at a single bound. We need to break these cycles. We need to talk to ourselves and deal with our fear. Thinking about actually what is it that I'm afraid of, and is it actually happening now? No. Because I can tell every one of you, you are no more dying right now than I am. That's not what's happening to any one of us here and now. This is the living bit of the piece of string. Whatever happens out here, happens. But let's deal with it at that point, not now. There is no evidence that emotionally we can pre-prepare ourselves for anything. Think about a big event in your life, getting married, having a baby, and it was never exactly like you thought it was. The event had its own momentum, and you couldn't necessarily prepare yourself for it because we don't actually know what it's going to be like. And mindfulness helps here. Mindfulness, as I said, works on the amygdala, which is where fear comes from. And we want to try and work with curiosity and avoid our stories, and most importantly, be Wonder Woman, even for you men. And I know that creates such a weird image in my brain then, talking about men being Wonder Woman, but still. Cuffs, they were silver, and they deflected bullets. Ours need to deflect off other people's comments, and sometimes deflect off our own thoughts. Meaning making, telling your story, processing it. What did you learn? Sometimes revising your beliefs and goals, sometimes looking at what benefit has come out of it, but recognising that things are different. And you are putting the pieces of the puzzle together every moment. If you remember nothing else from my talk, please take this away. Think about what brings you joy. If you sit with your suffering, you cannot see anything else. This comes from the work of Frankl, who was interned into a concentration camp in the Second World War. And what he found was that if the people who survived psychologically and physically were the people who were able to move away from their suffering, they could laugh, they could see joy out in the compound, they could dance and sing. The people who sat in the corner waiting to die didn't live. So we have to move towards joy. And we ask ourselves, what are the favourite things? Who and what is most important to us? And what makes your heart sing? And each of you tonight are to do your joy map. In the centre of a page, write the word joy and put down what brings you joy. Sitting in the garden, cup of tea, listening to the birds, sunshine on my face. It's not big trips overseas. Listening to my godchildren laugh. It's the little things. Understanding your grief, working with it, avoiding the prison of positivity. How many people are sick and tired of people saying, well, you've just got to be positive. Don't drop your bundle. If you want to cry, I give you permission to cry. If you want to be angry, then allow yourself to have emotions. Don't ignore them. And getting support from other people, avoiding your mask. There are no secrets, they're not helpful, especially when you're working with children. And Cancer Council have a fantastic, absolutely wonderful brochure, booklet on talking to kids. Choosing your supports carefully, as I said, those people who are additive. And as Annabelle said, making it clear what people can do to help. People may not understand, but if you actually tell them and ask them to listen, not to give advice, just to listen, they actually have an opportunity to hear what you're saying. And so you don't feel squashed. What you feel is nurtured and embraced. Solving problems rather than avoiding them. Getting support will reduce your anxiety. And putting good things in. Accepting your limitations and learning to say no. There it is. How many people are good at it? So, we learn to say no in multiple ways, and I think if a frog can do it, we could all say no. What we have to avoid is thinking that we are super people, because we're not. So this is, please don't confuse me with someone who can do everything, because we can't. We have to accept that there are limitations, and sometimes there are more limitations now after a brain tumour than there were before. Thinking about what is in your control and what isn't. You have choices, so choose how you live. In the now, in this moment, moment to moment. There are a whole range of stress reduction techniques that you can use. Mindfulness meditation is one of them. A whole host of relaxation techniques. Cancer Council has a wonderful relaxation CD as well. The most important thing we have to do is to remember to do this. And it's a simple thing and it comes very naturally. How am I going for time?
You're a little ahead of schedule, Jane,
So I can keep going. Wonderful. Running my own business has given me given me an ulcer, 2 heart attacks and 4 nervous breakdowns. I manufacture relaxation tapes. Just simply counting from 1 to 10. Taking a few deep breaths. Even just saying the word relax, relax, relax. A metronome or a clock can be helpful. Progressive muscle relaxation, some people love, I personally don't. Mindfulness, just focusing in on the breath or thinking about a special place. That's mine. When I look at it, I can feel it. I can feel the coolness of the water. I can take myself there and everything else just drifts away. If you're not meditating, I will encourage you to try it. Given it's mindfulness in May, try it for the month, 5 minutes a day, see how you go. Fantastic app called Smiling Mind. It's an Australian app and it's really great. And if you've got kids, there's a kids version as well. Exercise is important, and I don't know what you've spoken about today, but yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, all of these mindfulness exercises are helpful. But tell your instructor, tell the person what's happening in relation to your health so they can modify things. Because we don't want you trying something like this. When you Google yoga poses, this is an easy pose. That's a bit more my style. There is evidence that exercise and sport is going to have a massive impact on your mood and help with fatigue. But you need to pick something you like. I am not a gym person, but I certainly love yoga and would go to yoga class every night if I could. But ask me to go to the gym, it's not going to happen. So pick. We know that a healthy diet is important, but so is sleep. How many of you here are sleeping well? About 10 people put your hands up, so it's about normal that most people don't. We don't want to be lying there all night worrying about being awake. Sleep is important, getting enough sleep and having good sleep hygiene. So trying to go to bed at the same time every night. That relaxation CD that the Cancer Council have, the last track on that CD, is in fact a sleep track. It will help get you to sleep and keep you asleep. Avoiding these things in the bedroom. Bedrooms are for 2 things. They are for sleep and they are for sex. They are not for anything else. They are not for electronic devices. All of these are backlit and they turn off melatonin, which is the substance that gets you to sleep. And we need to be turning on melatonin. My slides are going up on the Cancer Council website so you can have a look at this one in more detail. It does give an outline of good sleep hygiene, but it's about routine, half an hour before bed, doing a technique called the data dump, sitting at the table, dumping down all the thoughts and feelings, getting them out of your head onto paper so that you can leave them in the kitchen rather than taking them in the bedroom with you. And creating a sanctuary in the bedroom. So saying to your partner, please do not talk to me about important things when we're lying in bed together. Because what happens is one person goes to sleep and the other one feels like tontining the other person in the night because they're lying awake all night. And we don't want that. We want good relationships where we don't feel resentful because our partner's unloaded on us in the bedroom and now we can't go to sleep. So talk about it. All of it is a process of adaptation and change. And change we all think is a bad thing, but it may not always be. Sometimes there are things that come out of it. And we're building bridges. And you don't have to do it alone. There's people that can help. Your GP is always an important avenue. and we have to remember to laugh. Do I have 5 more minutes?
Yes, you have 5 more minutes.
I'd like to read you something. It comes from a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom by an American who, its name is Rachel Remen. She has had illness herself. She has worked with people with cancer for many years and with other serious illnesses. And she's written 2 books, and this book called Kitchen Table Wisdom is fabulous, but I do have to put my glasses on. This particular reading is called The Puzzle. All through my childhood, my parents kept a giant jigsaw puzzle set up on a puzzle table in the living room. My father, who started this, always hit the box top. The idea was to put the pieces together without knowing the picture ahead of time. Different members of the family and friends would work on it, sometimes for only a few minutes, until after several weeks, hundreds and hundreds of pieces would each find their place. Over the years, we finished dozens of these puzzles. In the end, I got quite good at it, and I took a certain satisfaction in being the first one to see where a piece went, or how 2 groups of pieces might fit together. I especially loved the time when the first hint of pattern would emerge, and I could see what had been there hidden all along. The puzzle table was my father's birthday present to my mother. I can see him setting it up and gleefully pouring the pieces of that first puzzle from the box onto the tabletop. I was 3 or 4, and I did not understand my mother's delight. They hadn't explained this game to me, doubtless thinking I was too young to participate, but I wanted to even then. Alone in the living room early one morning, I climbed on a chair and I spread out hundreds of the loose pieces lying on the table. The pieces were small. Some were brightly coloured and some were dark and shadowy. The dark ones seemed like spiders or bugs, ugly and a little frightening. They made me feel uncomfortable. Gathering up a few of these, I climbed down and I hid them under one of the sofa cushions. For several weeks, whenever I was in the living room, I'd climb up on the chair, take a few more dark pieces, and add them to my collection under one of the cushions. So this first puzzle took the family a very long time to finish. My mother, frustrated, finally asked me what I'd done with the pieces that were missing. I said I'd put them under one of the cushions. She rescued them and completed the puzzle. I remember watching her do this. I was astounded. I had not known there would be a picture. It was quite beautiful. A picture of a deserted beach. Without the pieces I had hidden, the game made no sense. Perhaps winning requires that we love the game unconditionally. Perhaps life does provide all the pieces. When I accept certain parts of life and deny and ignore the rest, I can only see my life as a piece at a time, the happiness of a time of celebration or success, or the ugliness and pain of a loss or failure that I'm trying hard to put behind me, out of sight. But like the dark pieces of the puzzle, these sadder events, painful as they are, have proven themselves to be part of something larger. What brief glimpses I have had of something hidden seem to require accepting as a gift every last piece. There's more to the reading, but I will leave that to you. Thank you very much, and I'm open to questions for whatever time I might have available.